Hi, my name is Nicole Fennell. I chose to research and present on segregation in contemporary urban schools. In the following presentation, I'll be covering what modern day segregation in public schools look like, as well as how it contributes to the racial achievement gap, and covering 60 years of history since the civil rights movement. I cover why we're fighting the same fight and then some things that are being done about it. And finally, I will conclude with a take-home question for each of us in education to consider. The first question is, what does modern-day segregation in public schools look like? This quote is by an educator in Pennsylvania urban schools, and they said that if you can look in a classroom and know whether it's an upper-level class or a lower-level class based on the racial composition of the classroom, it's segregated. So modern-day segregation is no longer a result of uninformed or undercover Klan members. Segregation in contemporary urban schools is actually propelled by elitist parents moving their children so they can have a better life. It's propelled by tests that are required to be taken prior to kindergarten that will determine where a child falls academically for the remainder of his or her school career. And modern-day segregation is actually propelled by the Board of Education and its unequal distribution of fundings, and we cover that later, and the results are actually quite disturbing. So one of the methods that contributes to modern-day segregation is tracking. And tracking is just separating students into certain groups or classes and curriculum based on academic ability. In a tracking system, the entire population is assigned to classes according to whether the student's overall achievement can be considered average, above average, or below average. And then the students attend these academic classes only with those whose overall achievement and academic capability is the same as their own. And this sort of phasing actually promotes social, racial, and economic discrimination. It intensifies inequality prior to a student even beginning school. This is going back to those exams that you take before kindergarten. And the phasing actually puts higher income and white kids on the high tracks and into elite classrooms where then all of the funds are then going. So there are things that tracking does for a school, and there are things that tracking does not do for a school. And the thing that it does is it creates an environment that is conducive to students who are eager to learn if they're placed on a high track. But what tracking does not do is reflect a student's actual academic capability. It places students disproportionately. And this disproportionate placement of poor and minority students into low tracks actually causes a characterization that is thought to have negative impact on a student's attitude towards school and their performance in their classrooms. And this sort of phasing actually rings chillingly close to the behavior during the time of Brown versus the Board of Education. Something else that contributes to modern day segregation is the distribution of funds. It's perpetuating segregation in urban schools. And then recent research actually found that poverty by itself did not explain the underfunding of schools that are primarily minorities. One research project looked at funding for 500 schools in the state of Pennsylvania, and the results were disturbing. Mowinski, he was a data scientist who conducted this experiment, and he said that if you color code the districts based on their racial composition, you see this very stark breakdown. At any given poverty level, districts that have a higher proportion of white students get substantially higher funding than districts that have more minority students. That means that no matter how rich or poor the district is, funding gaps exist based only on racial composition of the school. Just the increased presence of minority students actually deflates the district's funding level. That's just racism. Funding also, the ones that have a few more students of color get lower funding than the ones that are 100% or 95% white. And this has left low-income minority students in failing urban public schools. This compounding issue of low-income neighborhoods and biased funding actually leaves schools with little money or resources to educate their students and thus little hope of breaking the poverty cycle. The racial achievement gap is seen in preparing the older students for college. Many high quality and well-known colleges are looking for students who push themselves, have excelled in high school courses. And segregation again rears its ugly head when not all students have equal opportunity to build such great transcripts. Recent studies actually show that Black, Hispanic, and Native American students are less likely to attend high schools that offer advanced courses. They're less likely to participate in those courses when they are offered. The achievement gap in advanced courses partly reflects an achievement gap that starts before kindergarten, as mentioned before. It's a sort of segregation that begins before a child's first year of school, and this goes back to tracking and the tests that are taken prior to kindergarten enrollment. To combat this, schools actually need to higher their standards for all students, not just those tracked into high-level learning courses, and they need to accept that a broad range of students can succeed in advanced courses. So in these advanced courses, who passes? It's the wealthy and the white or Asians, even stereotypically, they do perform better academically. And then the following information is actually taken from the education department. The students who actually take college prep courses and pass them are disproportionate. They are the wealthy and the whites and the Asians. But the statistics show that Black and Latino students make up 37% of high schools, and only 27% of them are enrolled in AP classes. Even more staggering, of the 27 enrolled in AP classes, only 18% of them are passing their exams, according to the Board of Education. The Black and Latino minorities pushing themselves to take these advanced courses have been left to fall off the wagon, and this is because of the characteristically biased questions that are on these standardized tests, which we learned about in our reading last week. The standardized testing is inherently biased. The cultural biases are rooted in national exams, and it's in large part due to the College Board. Final proofs of national exams can contain questions that favor Caucasian students, and this skews the scores to produce results that show minorities doing worse than other races. And so this actually means lower test scores, less funding. And so do we see a cycle here? In the end, the students are penalized based on the demographics, and they're not awarding them for their ability. So again, this reflects a blatant disregard by the Board of Education for students based on their skin color. This is the definition of racism. So more than 50 years later, we are still fighting the same fight as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. His I Have a Dream speech, where we are still looking at the same sort of injustice he describes during the civil rights movements. This part of his speech I put together because it reflects the education system and segregation. It says, "Now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children. It would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of the moment. I have a dream, and it is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." The disheartening element about all of this social, academic, and economic injustice is that it perpetuates a cycle. Students in urban schools have a hard time learning when they're constantly reminded that they're on the latter half of the education system and that they're receiving leftovers from the wealthier white schools. And the only way to increase the confidence of an urban student is to break that cycle. So what's being done about it? Under Obama's administration, the Education Department Civil Rights Office had been charged to look into cases of reported discrimination, when prior they often went unnoticed, and this new decree actually resulted in thousands of backed up cases. The school choice policy, which allowed parents to decide where they place their children, has led to an increasingly disproportionate demographic in urban schools. And so the co-director at the Civil Rights Office is looking into changing the stipulations of that policy. And that's almost, is it good or bad if you're forcing a student to go somewhere? I don't know how it is in your area, but where I live, you go to school based on where you live. It's not the parent's choice unless they want to pay extra, and maybe that is what some of these elitist parents are doing, but that is something they're looking into doing to change the racial biasness. There have been plenty of complaints made, but sadly it seems that it's been slow progress. I did a lot of research to see maybe some policies that have been put in place. There have been comments made, but it doesn't seem that a whole lot has been done at the moment. So that leaves us with a question: where do we go from here? I have demonstrated that methods such as tracking and standardized testing contribute to segregation in contemporary urban schools, and I've shown the disproportionate distribution of funds based on demographics, and then I highlighted the very few things that are being done on a larger level to stop perpetuating the cycle of racism. But now I leave you all with the question: where do we go from here? On a smaller scale in a personal classroom, what can we do about it? Thank you for taking the time to watch this. Feel free to ask any questions. I appreciate your comments. Thank you.